The United Nations weighed in on the state of race relations in the U.S., and they had some pretty harsh things to say. So first and foremost, they said that the U.S. owes black people reparations for slavery. Now, what led them to, having this conversation or releasing the statements that they released is, of course, the slew of unarmed black people who have been killed in the U.S. So they came out and said, you know what, you still owe reparations for slavery. And they also, quote, expressed concern over the unresolved legacy of colonial history, enslavement, racial subordination and segregation, racial terrorism, and racial inequality. Now, I should be clear, though, and mention that what they mean by reparations is pretty vague and pretty unclear. And in fact, if anything, they allude to it not being what you think it is. They say it may include, quote, elements of an apology and a form of debt relief to the descendants of enslaved people. But on the one hand, you look at it, and look, it's fair to say, I never fucking owned slaves. No living white person in the United States owned slaves, and no living black person in the United States right now was a slave. So, one argument is, that's not, like, what are you going to do? Like, punish people who had nothing to do with it and reward people who had nothing to do with it and have no firsthand experience? That's one argument. But on the other hand, the argument would be, well, look, the U.S. did 245 years of slavery where black people were just literally treated as property, and they were property in the eyes of the law. Then they promised them compensation in the form of 40 acres and a mule. They never gave them shit. There was also, 100 years of segregation and Jim Crow after that. And then blacks have only been free on paper all across America for 50 years, right? So about 1965 is when we're talking, then a segregation. And it's not like, by the way, okay, segregation is over and now everybody all of a sudden views everybody in an egalitarian way and everybody's equal. Like, that didn't happen. We wish that was the case. On paper, it was the case. Like, okay, now everybody's equal. But look, that wasn't the mentality. So you had 65, 75, 85, 95, 2005, 2015. Yeah, so about 50 years, a little over 50 years is how long on paper. So, I mean, if you really look at the scope of it, slavery went on for a really long time. Jim Crow and segregation went on for a really long time. And we're still, like, in the baby phase of, on paper even, having free black people all around America. And then, obviously, you bring up the aspect of mass incarceration, and you go, well, how really free are not only people of color in this country, but also poor white people in this country when it comes to the drug war? So black people, minorities are disproportionately targeted, but there are also a lot of poor white people who are in jail as a result of criminalizing substances. And make no mistake about it, the history of it is you do that to police the undesirables. So, okay, so we're going to ban this substance because it turns out Hispanics use this substance. You're going to ban that substance because it turns out blacks use this substance. So, that the net effect of that is, that's why some people call it the new Jim Crow, is, you criminalize these poor communities and it perpetuates this system of the rich staying rich and then, the poor staying poor. So now, again, people could still look at that argument and they go, okay, but still today, no white people that are alive were slave owners, no black people were slaves, so the whole conversation is an unfair conversation. Why are we even having it? That's the argument some people would make. But again, the counter-argument to that is the effects of that system, which existed for so long, we are still feeling today. Now, people could deny it, but they're just wrong. So, for example, when you look at inherited wealth, so when you look at average white net worth versus average black net worth, for white people, it's $142,000 thereabouts. For black people, it's $11,000. So there is a gigantic disparity. Now, in all seriousness, you'll have silly people will look at it and say, well, that's just because white people work harder and black people lazy. Yeah, but except I just told you this is white net worth versus black net worth. Inheritance is a tremendous part of that. So in other words, if segregation is only about 50 years old, that means there are people living today who grew up under segregation. Their parents didn't have any wealth to fucking pass down to them because that's the way the system was designed. So they were left behind by design. Yes, of course you are by definition still feeling the effects of that today because we're talking about wealth that was passed down from generation to generation. If all you got to do is go back one generation and there's no fucking wealth, you think we're still feeling the effects? Of course we're still feeling the effects. And that's why liberals say, hey, look, man, we're in favor of equal opportunity. So in other words, you could strawman us all you want and say, oh, you're in favor of equality of outcome. No, we're not. We're not in favor of some insane version of utopian communism. We don't think that's the case. I've heard nobody on the left in the United States, prominent figure, argue for that. What we're saying is, okay, we want equality of opportunity. So in other words, in the race of life, you can't have the white community, by and large, it's a 100-yard dash. White people run 80 yards in front and then turn around to black people and go, okay, you could start now. Well, you got an 80-yard head start. What the fuck's going on here? Oh, there you go complaining again. Fucking black people can't get their shit together. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. What? But you are 80 yards in front there. Then you told them they could start running. So our point is that makes no sense. Now, when it comes to reparations, look, if they're talking about an apology, that should be the most obvious no-brainer ever. I mean, honestly, I honestly think even a lot of people who might even be admitted racists would say, yeah, you can apologize. There was slavery. So that's a no-brainer, okay? When it comes to other forms of it, would I be in favor of some sort of a transfer of wealth, where it's like a tax on white people and then you give it to black people? No, because then, again, how do you prove which families, own slaves, which families are the descendants of slaves? Do we really know for sure? There could be a lot of gaming of that system. Furthermore, there could be many poor white people, and you're going to tax the poor white people who also, in today's day and age, need a hand up. So that doesn't seem to make much sense to me. But if you just talk about something like debt relief, or you talk about something like, I don't know, maybe like a tax holiday or something for whatever the kid, 5 years, 10 years, or whatever it is, for to the best of your ability, trying to get the people who we know are descendants of slaves, and that's what they get. So either debt relief or a tax holiday for an extended period of time, where it's not a net subsidy and it's not redistribution from one person to another person, but it's just a break for that individual person. That's something different, and that's something I could see myself supporting. But yeah, I do think it's an interesting conversation, and there is a lot to be said in the conversation, and I don't agree, even though many people are going to take this position, that, that's it. There should be no conversation, and any conversation, by definition, is, punitive of white people. No, but it's not. I just described how I wouldn't be punitive to white people. But even discussing that issue is punitive to white people. But no, it's not. So, everybody take your guard down a little bit, have the conversation. You could be against it, but provide an actual good argument for being against it, as opposed to just shutting down and saying, it's stupid, Well, no, it's really not. And by the way, it's not like there isn't precedent for this historically. Look at what we did with Native Americans. They effectively get a form of reparations, tax-free casinos. So we did a genocide against them. After a while, we were like, hey, you know what? Our bad. You get reservations, sovereign territory, and you get tax-free casinos. Okay. Well, with black people, there still hasn't been perhaps enough done yet. And it's an interesting conversation to have, and one where we could try to find fruitful answers.